I always thought the sound of a helicopter was exciting, something you heard in movies right before the hero showed up, or right after the bad guys realized they'd messed with the wrong man. But when that rotothunder rolled over my land in northern Texas, kicking dust across the mesquite and rattling the fencing posts I had just sunk into the soil, I felt something entirely different. A cold, sharp warning that someone powerful had decided I was the one who needed to be put in my place. It all started with a fence. A simple fence. 4 strands of barbed wire, a line of treated cedar posts, and my intention to mark publicly, legally, permanently, what belonged to me. I wasn't doing anything strange. I wasn't pushing boundaries. I was fencing my own damn land, land I had inherited, land that had been surveyed and recorded long before my parents were even born, land I had walked barefoot on as a kid, land that had sheltered our cattle, our family, our stories, land no outsider had any right to lay claim to. But in Texas, boundaries aren't just about soil, they're about power. And on that sun-scorched afternoon, someone decided that my fence was a threat. The helicopter didn't announce itself at first. The wind was quiet, the heat shimmering over the fields, and I had my gloves half off, drinking warm water from a bottle that had gone plasticky in the sun. The only sound was the scrape of the wire spool rolling on dry date. Then the air changed. A weird, vibrating pressure hit my chest before my ears caught it. A low thump. Thump-thump, and suddenly the grass flattened in a sweeping circle like something invisible was brushing the earth. I looked up. A matte gray Bell helicopter was descending, too low, too close, and definitely not any kind of ranching craft I'd ever seen. No markings, no ranch insignia, no state seal. Just a blank, authoritative force dropping onto my land as though it owned the place. I took a step back from the fencing line as a rotor wash blasted grit into my eyes. The helicopter settled about 30 yards from me, skids crunching the dry soil. The engine whined. Dust rolled through the air like smoke. My shirt stuck to my back. That was the moment, right then, that something inside me twisted. A kind of instinctive alarm. A feeling I was about to be told something no Texan ever wants to hear, that his land isn't his anymore. The passenger door swung open before the rotors fully slowed. A man jumped out, wearing black tactical pants, boots, and a windbreaker even though the heat was brutal. No uniform patch, no badge, and no hello. He marched toward me like he knew exactly who I was. "You need to stop immediately," he shouted, pointing at my half-strung line of barbed wire. The words hit harder than the wind from the blades. Stop immediately. Spoken like an order. Not a request. I lowered my water bottle slowly. "Mind telling me who the hell you are?" I called back, raising my voice over the rotor noise. "You're constructing an unauthorized barrier," he said. "Cease all work right now." I stared at him, confused, and then angry. "Barrier? It's a fence. On my property. You got a problem with that. You better show me your paperwork." He didn't blink, didn't flinch. He just stepped closer, as if crowding me was part of his job. "This land may not be what you think it is, Mr. Carter." Hearing my last name from a stranger who hadn't asked for it sent a chill through me. "How do you know me?" I asked. "That's not important," he said. "What matters is that the fence stops. Immediately." I took one step toward him, planted my boots firmly in the dust. "It sure as hell is important. And unless you can tell me why you're landing military hardware on my property and barking orders like you own this place, this conversation's over." He didn't look worried. He looked amused. "We're trying to prevent you from making a very expensive mistake," he said calmly. "A mistake for who?" I shot back. "Because it isn't mine." He folded his hand behind his back, a gesture that somehow made him look even more official, even though everything about him lacked anything official at all. "Mr. Carter, I'm authorized to tell you this much. There are ongoing territorial assessments related to this parcel. You erecting barriers compromises those assessments." That was the moment the question hammered into my skull. What kind of assessment requires a helicopter to stop a man from putting up a fence on land recorded under his own name? I could see the uncertainty flicker across his expression, just for a second, when he realized I wasn't backing down. Texans don't scare easy, especially not on their own dirt. So I pushed. "Show me your authority," I demanded. "A badge. A document. A single piece of paper with a real government header on it. Otherwise, you're trespassing. The man's jaw tightened. You have been warned. If you continue construction, consequences will follow. That was it. No explanation. No identification. No reason. He toned, walked back to the helicopter, and climbed in. The pilot never looked at me. Not once. A moment later, the blade screamed back to full speed, and the gray machine lifted off, blowing a storm of soil across the field before tearing off toward the horizon. I stood there long after the noise faded, breathing dust, staring at the fresh line of cedar posts I had hammered into the ground hours earlier. My fence. My land. My right. What kind of operation tries to intimidate a landowner with a helicopter? What kind of territorial claim needs to be enforced with secrecy instead of documents? What exactly did they think I was fencing off? And the real question, the one that chilled and enraged me all at once, did someone powerful start acting like they owned my land because they had something buried under it? I didn't know the answer yet, but I knew one thing for certain. Whoever they were, they had just made a mistake. A big one. Because they hadn't scared me off, they had started a war. I didn't touch the fence for the rest of that day. Not because a helicopter rattled me, not in the way they wanted, at least, but because every instinct told me something bigger than a simple land dispute had just landed on my property. And if there's one thing my father taught me, it's this. When a powerful man steps onto your land without permission, don't react, observe. The sun was lowering into one of those Texas fireball sunsets, red-orange streaks smeared over the horizon, when the dust finally settled enough that I could see my tools again. My gloves were half buried. The spool of barbed wire had rolled into a patch of prickly pear, and everything was coated in the powdery film kicked up by the helicopter's blades. I walked the length of the posts I'd set, 22 of them, straight as an arrow, perfectly lined with the survey markers from the county. Nothing unusual, just honest, back-breaking work. Work nobody had the right to interrupt. But as I reached the end of the line near the dry creek bed, something caught my eye. Something small. Out of place. A piece of plastic. Shiny. Black. No bigger than a stick of gum. I bent down, brushed the dirt off it, and turned it over in my hand. It wasn't a wrapper or farming debris. It was a device, a compact, rectangular tracker of some kind. A GPS beacon, maybe, but it wasn't the kind you buy online to slap under your ATV. This one looked military grade, durable casing, no branding, a single blinking red indicator, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. They'd dropped it, or left it. Either way, it was a mistake. I slipped it into my pocket. Maybe they thought I was just some simple rancher who'd be too intimidated to notice something like that. Maybe they assumed that a helicopter landing would send me racing back inside like some panicked animal. If so, they'd forgotten who they were dealing with. My family had been on this land for 4 generations. We knew every bend of the creek, every shift in the soil, every animal track worth knowing. You can't gaslight a man about the land he grew up on. Not successfully, anyway. The temperature dropped quickly as the sun sank. Coyotes started yipping. A lone moth fluttered around the lantern I'd hung on the side of my truck. I loaded my tools into the bed and locked the toolbox, but my mind was still on the device in my pocket. Why leave a tracker? What exactly were they tracking? Me, the fence, or something else hidden beneath the soil? I leaned against the truck door, staring out at the land. I could see the outline of the hills my grandfather used to point at, saying, "That's where the Comanche used to scout before raids." High ground always tells a story. High ground tells a story. That stuck with me. So instead of heading home, I took the ridge trail up the back of the property. The old path was steep and rocky, worn down by decades of cattle hooves and weather, but I knew every turn in the dark. The moon was bright enough to make out the path, and the truck's suspension groaned as I climbed higher. From the ridge, you can see everything. The neighboring ranches, the 2-lane highway glinting faintly miles away, even the spot where the helicopter had landed, now just an eerie circle of flattened grass. But that wasn't what drew my attention. It was the lights. Far off on the edge of my property, land that was mostly scrub and mesquite, miles from the house, a cluster of faint, bluish light shimmered. Not bright enough to be a building, not space like ranch flood lamps, They were too close to the ground, too deliberate. I narrowed my eyes. Those lights weren't there yesterday. And more importantly, they were exactly where the man in the helicopter didn't want me fencing. A cold, angry clarity settled over me. Something was happening on my land. Something secret, something illegal, and the helicopter wasn't there to warn me. It was there to keep me from finding out what they were doing. I killed the truck engine and stepped out into the still night. Crickets chirped. The wind rustled through the mesquite. My boots crunched softly on the rocky soil. I took out the tracker and stared at the blinking red light. Whoever it belonged to, whatever they were doing, they were sloppy, and sloppy people make mistakes you can exploit. I walked back downhill, got into my truck, and drove straight to the barn, where my dad's old workbench still stood. Dusty, rusty, but functional. I cleared a space, set the tracker on the wooden surface, and clicked on the bright overhead lamp. The thing looked even more suspicious under proper light. Compact, rugged, a recessed panel with a microscopic screw, something designed for security or government use. On the back, I spotted something I hadn't before, a tiny serial marking etched into the casing. Not a number, not a code, a symbol, 3 triangles forming a circle. My stomach tightened. I'd seen that symbol once before, engraved on a surveyor's stake driven into the ground near the old well house years ago. A stake that disappeared 2 days later without explanation. My father had brushed it off at the time. Some private contractor. They get lost out here, he'd said. But he'd been wrong. That symbol wasn't random. It wasn't benign. And now they were back. I grabbed my phone and snapped a picture of the tracker and the symbol. Then I pocketed the device again. Not because I didn't want to destroy it. I wanted nothing more than to smash it. But because something told me I'd need it later. And if they wanted to track something, let them track me. Let them follow the wrong lead while I found out what they were hiding. Before turning off a barn light, I paused, looking back at the workbench, the old wood my father had stained with oil and sweat, the scars from years of repairs, the memories attached to it. The scent of cedar and machinery felt grounding. And for the first time since the helicopter landed, I felt something sharper than anger. Not fear, not panic, resolve. If someone thought they could use my land for their secret project, if someone thought they could intimidate me with helicopters and tactical gear, if someone thought they could steal a piece of my history, they were about to learn a very important lesson. A Texan's land is more than property. It's identity. And nobody takes that without a fight. Before I left the barn, I glanced one last time at the tracker in my pocket. Let's see how deep this goes, I muttered. And then I stepped into the night, straight toward the faint blue lights glowing at the edge of my land. The blue lights didn't flicker. That was the first thing I noticed as I approached the far edge of my land. The lights were constant, steady, almost clinical. The kind of lights you'd see in a lab or a surgical room, not out here among rattlesnakes, thickets, and dust that got into everything. I hiked the last mile on foot. Could have taken the truck, but noise wasn't my friend tonight. And besides, if somebody had been sneaking onto my land with helicopters and military-grade trackers, they probably had ears and eyes out here too. I wasn't about to advertise my arrival. The moon had risen high, casting pale light across the landscape. Every mesquite branch looked like a crooked arm reaching toward me. The air smelled of dry earth and creosote. The kind of night where any sensible man would be home with a beer, not stalking towards something he had no business getting close to. But this was my land, and I was done letting strangers treat it like theirs. The lights grew brighter as I got closer, forming a faint glow behind a cluster of mesquite. My boots crunched softly on the soil. I crouched down, slowed my breathing, and moved between the bushes until the source of the lights finally came into view. What I saw made me freeze. A clearing had been carved into my property, cleanly, recently. Someone had cut down brush, cleared rocks, and smoothed a rectangular patch of earth about the size of a semi-trailer. The soil wasn't just flattened, it was compacted, like heavy machinery had been dragged across it. And in the middle, 3 metal stakes stuck out of the ground, forming a triangle. Each one had one of those blue lamps clamped to the top, shining downward. The lights illuminated the packed dirt with an eerie glow. But that wasn't the part that made my gut twist. The stakes had the same symbol as the tracker. 3 triangles forming a circle. Same exact mark. Someone had driven these into my land. Quietly. Recently. Someone who had an operation running out here before I ever lifted that fence post earlier today. Someone who absolutely did not want me discovering this. I moved closer, slow and silent. The dirt around the stakes was disturbed, boot prints, tire tracks, dragged equipment. I knelt and pressed a hand to the soil. It was still oddly warm. Not warm from the sun. Warm from machinery. There had been vehicles here. Maybe a trailer. Maybe a drilling rig. My breath caught. A drilling rig? On my property? For what? I felt my pulse kick hard. Oil? Gas? Minerals? Or something hidden? I pulled out my phone and snapped photos. Wide shots. Close-ups. The symbols. The stakes. The tracks. Evidence. Because if these people were bold enough to fly a helicopter onto my land, they'd be bold enough to destroy whatever they didn't want me to see. I followed the tracks leading away from the stakes. They ran north, toward the creek, toward the place they'd stopped me from fencing. Something about the path bothered me. The tire impressions were deep, too deep for a pickup or utility UTV. These were heavy machines, industrial grade, possibly armored. What kind of research group or contractor needed armored vehicles on private land? I crouched down, ran my fingers along one impression, feeling the angled tread pattern. It wasn't standard, not ranching, not construction, a manufactured military tread. My jaw clenched. Whoever these people were, they weren't local. They weren't county. They weren't state. You don't hide military tread vehicles and unmarked helicopters on someone's land unless you're either extremely bold or extremely protected. A twig snapped behind me. I turned so fast I nearly fell. Nothing. Just wind through branches. I stayed still. Listened. Then I heard it. A faint hum. Soft. Mechanical. Moving through the air. Not a helicopter. Not an engine. A drone. I dropped flat, heart hammering, and pressed myself into the dirt behind a thick mesquite trunk. The hum grew louder. A small quadcopter buzzed overhead, passing directly above the clearing I'd just been inspecting. A stubby camera lens on its underside swept left and right. They were watching the site, actively, which meant they might be nearby. Watching me, too. I held my breath until the drone passed, its lights blinking faintly as it moved north, following the tracks toward the creek. I waited another full minute before slowly rising to my feet. The anger started creeping back in, stronger than before. Not fear, anger. They were patrolling my land with drones, conducting unauthorized work, threatening me with helicopters. This wasn't a dispute. This wasn't a mistake. This was an operation. One I wasn't supposed to notice. One I sure as hell wasn't supposed to interrupt. I headed back toward the stakes, toward the cold blue glow. I kicked at the soil, testing the depth. Then my boot hit something metal. I knelt, brushed away more dirt. A hatch. A steel, rectangular hatch about 2 feet wide and 3 feet long, flush with the earth. Painted the same dusty brown as the soil. No handle. Just a recessed panel with a symbol etched faintly across it. The same 3-triangle circle. My fingers trembled, not from fear, but from realization. They weren't drilling. They were accessing something. Something below my land. A bunker? A storage unit? A pipeline? A vault? The hatch was new, smooth metal, no rust, no corrosion. Installed within weeks. Maybe days. I pressed the recessed panel. It didn't budge. I pressed harder. Nothing. Whatever was beneath this hatch wasn't meant for curious hands or trespassers. Ironic, given I was the actual landowner. A gust of wind blew through the clearing, and for a second, the lights flickered. I froze. Not because of the flicker, because of the sound that came with it. A faint, low rumble from beneath the ground. Mechanical, slow, rhythmic. Something was running down there. I backed away, pulse spiking. The blue lights hummed softly. The soil vibrated under my boot. There was a facility under my ranch. A hidden facility. And those men, those unmarked helicopter cowboys, they weren't protecting my land. They were protecting their secret. A secret buried under my soil. My breathing steadied as a truth clicked into place. That's why they knew my name. That's why they wanted the fence gone. That's why they'd brought intimidation, not paperwork. And that's why they'd made the one mistake they never should have. They let me get close. I looked around the clearing one last time, committing everything to memory. The stakes, the lights, the hatch, the tracks. Proof. All of it proof of a violation that no Texan would tolerate. Not on his land. Not on his legacy. I turned toward home, planning my next move. I wasn't calling the sheriff. I wasn't calling the county. I sure as hell wasn't calling any government office. If these people were using helicopters and drones and hidden hatches, they were beyond local authorities. No, this was something I'd handle myself. Because they'd crossed a line they'd never should have crossed. And I was going to make them regret it. By the time I made it back to the house, it was close to 2 a.m. The place looked different that night. Too quiet, too still. The porch light flickered like it was struggling for breath. And for the first time since inheriting the ranch, I felt the weight of isolation pressing in around me. Whatever was under my land, whatever those people were doing, I was alone in it. The thought didn't scare me. It sharpened me. I went inside, locked the door, and set the tracker on the kitchen table. The little red light was still blinking. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, popped it open, and sat down, staring at that pulsing dot like it was a countdown. What were they tracking? Movement? Heat? Proximity? Or was it a dead man switch, meant to tell someone when it was picked up? Or maybe they already knew I had it. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. The house creaked from the wind. My old dog, Rusty, lifted his head and watched me from the couch, tail thumping weakly. Even he sensed something was different. "Everything's okay, boy," I said softly. A lie. I took another long drink and set the bottle down. I picked up the tracker, turned it over. Looked closer. There was a micro slot on one side. Too small for a USB. Too large for a SIM. A proprietary connection, one used by military contractors or black operations. And there was a faint scratch on the casing. Not random. Not accidental. A number. 47B. Or maybe it wasn't a number at all. Maybe it was a designation. A unit. A team. A protocol. The more I stayed, the more my anger simmered. Whoever had left this wanted control. Of the land. Of the secret beneath it. Of me. But Texas landowners aren't easy to control. Not unless you think intimidation works. The helicopter. The threats. The unmarked men. They'd expected me to walk away scared. Instead, they'd made the mistake of showing me just enough to know something was worth protecting. And now I wanted to know everything. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Jackson," a groggy voice answered. "It's the middle of the damn night." "Need a favor," I said. "Buddy, last time I helped you, we ended up hauling a bull out of a swimming pool. This is different." Silence. Jackson knew my tone. He'd served 8 years in the Army. Seen things. He understood when something wasn't a joke. "Where you at?" he asked. "My place." "I'll be there in an hour." He hung up. I exhaled. While I waited, I took the tracker outside and placed it on the far end of the porch. If someone was watching through it, let them stare at empty boards for a while. I went back inside, grabbed my father's rifle off the wall, checked the chamber, and set it on the counter, just in case. The hours passed slow, long heavy. When headlights finally cut through the darkness, I felt a pinch of relief. Jackson's old Dodge rumbled up the driveway, dust trailing behind like a ghost. He stepped out wearing boots, jeans, and the same camo jacket he'd had since service. His beard was thicker, his eyes tired, but he stood solid, like someone you could trust when everything else went to hell. He walked up the porch. His gaze immediately locked onto the tracker. "What the hell is that?" he asked. "That," I said, "is something someone left on my land after landing a helicopter to tell me to stop fencing." He froze. "Repeat that." I explained everything. The helicopter, the man, the threats, the blue lights, the triangular stakes, the hatch, the drone. By the time I finished, Jackson looked like he'd aged 5 years. "Carter," he said quietly, "you're in something deep. maybe federal, maybe worse. I figured. He picked up the tracker carefully, studying it under the porch light. Contractor tech, he muttered. High-end, not consumer. This model's used for geomarking. Meaning, they are mapping something under your land, he said, and they don't want you interfering. My jaw tightened. So what are they mapping? He hesitated. That's the part that scares me, he said. This type of unit is usually deployed when the underground structure is sensitive. Sensitive how? He stared at me a moment, then asked, Carter, did the ground feel warm? Vibrating? Like machinery? A chill swept through me. It did, I said, under the clearing. He swore under his breath. That means they are operating something active. Ventilation, machinery, maybe even tunneling. Tunneling. I repeated, but I knew what he meant. A buried facility, a hidden base, under my ranch. Jackson sighed and pocketed the tracker. Listen, he said, men with this kind of gear don't threaten you because they're confused. They threaten you because they think they are untouchable. They think wrong. He studied me. You planning something? Not yet, I said. First, I need to know exactly what's under my land. He nodded slowly. Then we start by scouting. We grabbed gear, flashlights, binoculars, gloves, and headed for the back of the property. The moon was lower now, the night darker. The air smelled like dust and cedar. As we reached the trail, Jackson asked quietly, You sure you want to go back there tonight? They were there tonight, I said. I won't give them another head start. We pushed onward. The ranch was different with someone else beside me. Less lonely, more certain. Jackson moved quietly, scanning the horizon every few steps. For the first time since the helicopter incident, I felt like I had an advantage. I wasn't alone anymore. By the time we reached the clearing, the blue lights were dimmed, maybe timed, maybe motion-triggered. But the hatch was still there, silent, waiting. Jackson crouched beside it and placed a hand on the metal. Warm, he whispered. Too warm for a buried structure. Something is directly beneath this. He reached for the edge, feeling for seams. Then he froze. Carter, he whispered. Back up. I stepped away, instinct kicking in. He pointed to the date. And I saw it too. Footprints. Fresh ones. Deep, leading from the hatch, straight toward the trail we'd used. Someone had been here minutes before us. Or they were still here. A low crack echoed somewhere in the dark. Not like a twig, more like gravel shifting under a boot. Jackson raised his hand. Silent command. Behind the mesquite. 10 yards. Movement. I reached instinctively for my rifle, but the night was too quiet, too still, too expectant. Jackson leaned close and whispered, Carter, we're not alone. The movement behind the mesquite wasn't subtle. A shadow detached itself from the darkness, gliding low and deliberate, the soft crunch of dirt under boots the only sound betraying its presence. Jackson signaled me to stay still. We froze, crouched in the dry brush, rifles ready, hearts hammering. The wind carried the faint metallic scent of machinery, oil, iron, and something I couldn't quite place. Industrial, military, wrong. Carter, Jackson whispered, they are scouting, not just tracking you anymore. They want to see what we're capable of before they act. I tightened my grip on my rifle, my fingers itching to pull the trigger. Then 2 more shadows emerged, moving like coordinated predators. Black tactical gear, helmets, faint reflective lenses catching the moonlight. No insignia, nothing recognizable. They were professionals, and they were on my land. The first man paused, crouched, and tapped something on a small device. A light blinked briefly in the date, a laser of some kind. They were marking the hatch, the stakes, the blue lights. My blood boiled. Jackson leaned closer. They are not here to negotiate, he murmured. They are here to intimidate, maybe even to remove evidence. I swallowed hard. My mind flashed back to the helicopter, to the tracker, to the rumble under the ground. Every shred of warning, every intimidation tactic. They thought it would scare me off. They were wrong. I stood, Not fully, but enough that the shadows noticed. One of them stiffened, head snapping toward me. I caught the glint of a reflection, one of those night vision lenses. "Who's there?" The voice called, modulated and neutral, like a drill instructor giving commands. I stepped fully into view. "I'm Carter," I said, voice steady, "and this is my land." The second man shifted, drawing a side-arm. Jackson and I raised our rifles in unison. The tension was suffocating. Every nerve in my body screamed that this was a turning point. "You need to leave," I said, staring straight at them. "You have no right here. Whatever you're hiding under my property. Stop. Now." The first man let out a low, humorless laugh. "Carter," he said, "you really don't understand the situation you've stumbled into. This land is under observation. You're not authorized to interfere." Observation. I spat the word. "You mean theft, trespassing, operating a facility under my feet without my knowledge." The man tilted his head. "You really should stop before this becomes messy." I felt my patience snap. They already made it messy. I growled, "Landing a helicopter, leaving trackers, hiding lights and a hatch under my property. You think threatening me will scare me into submission?" Jackson stepped forward, shoulder brushing mine. "Carter, we can't take them lightly. They're armed, trained, and—" "I know what they are," I said sharply. "I grew up here. This is my land. And nobody, not helicopters, not armed men, threatens me on it without paying the price." The first man's laughter stopped. He scanned the surrounding darkness, motioning silently to his partner. They hesitated, assessing. Then the unthinkable happened. The taller one, the one with a weapon ready, spoke again, but this time, differently. "You're stubborn, dangerous, probably both." His tone carried more respect than threat, and it unnerved me. "Do you know what's beneath that hatch, Carter?" I didn't answer. He continued, "You're sitting on infrastructure most people will never see. Underground, self-contained, built decades ago. The government thought this area was forgotten. They were wrong." I felt the weight of realization pressing down. "This is federal property." I asked, voice steady but tinged with anger. "In a sense," he said, "but that's not why we're here. You're here. Your interference. And interference needs to be managed." I stared at him. "Managed how?" He shrugged lightly. "We were going to give you a warning. You got the warning. A helicopter, a tracker, the drone. You didn't heed it. Now," his eyes glinted, "now you force us to consider other options." Jackson muttered, "We need to move." I shook my head. "No, we stand our ground." The taller man's gaze softened, just for a moment. Then it hardened. He motioned again, and the shadows shifted. From the darkness, more figures emerged, 5 in total, all blacked out, all armed. They were professionals, military, paramilitary, or whatever shadowy mix had been protecting my land. One of them stepped forward. Placing a hand over his chest, he made a motion like a salute, and then, strangely, spoke. "We know who you are, Carter. We know what you value. We also know you won't stop." I didn't flinch. "Then you'd better leave." The air crackled. Tension stretched so tight it felt like it might snap. I could hear the hum of drones far overhead, machines below my feet, men around me, weapons at the ready. And then, most important, my land, my property, my inheritance, threatened for the first time in decades. A slow smile crept over my face, cold and measured. "You made a mistake," I said quietly. "You should never have brought your toys onto my land, never threatened my family, never underestimated me." The tallest man tilted his head. "And what do you plan to do?" I looked past them, toward the faint line of cedar posts I had hammered in that morning, toward the ridge that overlooked the clearing, toward every inch of land I had walked as a child, as a man, as a rightful owner. "I plan to make sure you regret this," I said, my voice low, steady, and deadly calm. Jackson nodded slightly, a silent agreement. We were outnumbered, outgunned, but the advantage wasn't in numbers. It was here, On my land. The shadows seemed to sense it too. They didn't advance. They only waited. And that's when I realized something crucial. They didn't know everything. They thought they did. They thought they were untouchable. They thought they had leverage over me. And they were about to learn why Texans never give up what's theirs. I stepped toward them, the moonlight catching the barrel of my rifle. Not a threat, but a declaration. You've been warned, I said. I'm not scared. And neither is my family. You take one step further onto my property, and there will be consequences. Real consequences. And I promise you won't like them. The taller man studied me, his eyes narrowing. Then he lifted a hand slightly, a silent truce, or maybe a signal to his team. You have until sunrise, he said. Then we act. With that, they melted back into the darkness, leaving only the faint hum of the drone receding into the distance. Jackson exhaled. I didn't move. My hands were steady, but my mind raced. We weren't just defending land. We were defending a secret someone powerful wanted to bury. And now, the war was no longer just about property. It was personal. The sun hadn't fully risen, but the first hints of light bled across the horizon, painting the Texas sky with a pale, cold glow. I was already awake, sitting on the ridge overlooking the clearing. Jackson was beside me, silent as ever, checking the rifle one last time. The air smelled of mesquite and dust, a reminder that the land was alive, that it belonged to us, not the intruders who'd thought they could hide beneath it. The hatch below waited. The blue stakes marking the edges of the operation still hummed faintly, whispering secrets I didn't yet fully know. But now I had leverage. Now I had a plan. And above all, I had a promise. No one intimidates me on my land and gets away with it. Carter, Jackson said quietly, they've got to know we're here. They'll be watching every move. I nodded, tracing the outline of the clearing below. Let them watch. Let them think they're untouchable. They've underestimated the wrong man. We moved carefully, boots crunching softly on gravel and dry soil. Every step was deliberate. Every shadow we passed, every ridge, every twisted mesquite branch became part of our strategy. I wasn't just reclaiming land. I was reclaiming authority. Every inch of property, every secret they tried to bury, every threat they'd made was mine to answer for. The clearing came into view. The blue lights were dim but still active, and the hatch gleamed faintly under the early morning glow. I crouched behind a mesquite, observing. The ground hummed faintly, a mechanical pulse, the heartbeat of whatever operation had been hiding beneath my ranch. I took a deep breath, then whispered to Jackson, "It's time." We approached the hatch. Jackson knelt and examined it, tapping the metal, tracing the seams. Then he looked at me, eyes glinting. "They didn't lock it conventionally," he said. "There's a release panel on the side. Military grade. It opens with a sequence. I can bypass it if we're quick." I nodded. "Do it." Minutes later, the hatch shifted slightly. A faint hiss escaped from the edges as the underground compartment released its seal. The smell hit me first, metal, oil, electricity. And then I saw it. A ladder leading down into darkness, faintly lit by emergency LEDs embedded in the walls. Jackson went first. I followed. Every sound echoed unnaturally, metal on metal, boots on rungs. Every second, I expected the shadows from the previous night to reappear, to confront us at the bottom. But nothing came. The underground chamber opened into a large, rectangular space. Machinery lined the walls, turbines, compressors, electrical boxes, and an array of unmarked containers. Tubes and cables snaked across the floor, pulsating with energy. My heart sank, and then hardened. Whatever they were doing down here, it wasn't just infrastructure. It was something valuable, something secret, and most importantly, it was on my property without my permission. Jackson whispered, "They've been mining something, or moving something. High security, likely government contracted." I scanned the room, eyes narrowing. Crates marked with cryptic symbols, some still sealed, some open with cables disappearing inside. I crouched near one and pulled a document that had been tucked under a panel. It was faded but legible, engineering schematics, coordinates, and references to materials labeled with chemical codes I recognized. This was high-level operation stuff, illegal or classified. They thought they could hide it, I muttered. Thought they could scare me off with helicopters and drones. Jackson placed a hand on my shoulder. They underestimated a man defending his home. That's your advantage. I smiled, cold and measured. Then it's time they learned it. We set to work. First, we disabled the blue lights and sensors to confuse any aerial surveillance. Jackson rigged the tracker they had planted earlier, turning it into a decoy. If they were watching, they'd see activity on the wrong side of the ranch. Meanwhile, I mapped every cable, every crate, every piece of equipment that could be evidence. Then came the final touch. I dug into the earth near one of the support beams and placed small charges, not enough to destroy, just enough to send a warning. They would know I had discovered their secret without obliterating it entirely. Hours passed. Sunlight crested fully, spilling into the chamber. The first helicopter appeared far in the distance, but by then, the tracker was sending them false signals. Their drone buzzed overhead, confused, scanning the wrong areas. And that's when I heard footsteps above. Not distant, not casual, directly over the clearing. They know we're here, Jackson said quietly. I didn't flinch. I climbed the ladder to the hatch, peering into the sunlit clearing. The black tactical figures had returned, 4 of them this time, cautious, scanning. They didn't see us yet. I raised my hand. Jackson understood instantly. On 3, which show we weren't afraid. 1, 2, 3. We burst from the hatch, rifles raised, voices firm, unshaken. You're on private property. I shouted, "Step back, I'll face the consequences." The men froze. A standoff, tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. And then the unexpected happened. One of them, the tallest, removed his helmet. His face was sharp, professional, but there was respect in his eyes. "You've got guts," he said calmly. "Most would have run. You didn't." "Guts," I said, voice low and steady, "isn't enough. This is my land, my property, my legacy, and you have violated all 3. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "You've made your point. Step aside. We'll withdraw, for now, but you should know we're not done." I felt the adrenaline spike. Try me again, and it won't be a warning next time. They backed off, slowly, respectfully, and as a helicopter lifted from the distance and the shadows melted into the horizon, I realized something. I had won. Not just land, not just the secret beneath it. I had won my pride, my family's legacy, my right to be feared on my own property. Jackson clapped me on the back. "You did it. They'll think twice before returning." I nodded, scanning the clearing one last time. The blue stakes, the hatch, the faint hum of machinery, it all still belonged to me, and it always would. As the sun climbed higher, I walked the ridge alone for a moment, looking over the land I had fought for. Every acre, every tree, every rocky incline had been defended today, not with law officers, not with bureaucracy, but with courage, strategy, and relentless determination. And deep down, I knew the war wasn't over. They would return. Maybe bigger, maybe more organized. But I was ready. They had underestimated one thing. Texans don't just fight for land. We live for it. And anyone who dares challenge that will regret it. The land was mine again. The secret remained protected. And my enemies had learned a lesson they would never forget.